from me.
Yes. That's fantastic.
Vince, let's wrap up. I wanted to talk about an article I wrote for Irish Breakdown tonight, and it was about the college football playoff.
Yes.
Because for the first time all year, I actually think Notre Dame has a legitimate shot at the playoff, which I didn't think I was going to have. But then I sat and looked at it, and I looked at what has happened and then what is in front of them that has to happen. There's no avoiding it. And so I wrote an article at irishbreakdown.com. I wanted to get your thoughts on it, and I wanted to kind of talk to, kind of put it out there and kind of look at kind of what happened this weekend. Oklahoma losing to Baylor was bigger than I thought it was going to be, because I think that if Notre Dame handles their business, meaning wins out and blows the next two teams out, because you need to. Like, listen, let me explain something to you, okay? Georgia Tech and Stanford are awful. Awful. They're both 3-7. Georgia Tech is in the process, or in the midst of a 1-5 stretch. They've given up 37.8 points per game during that stretch. Phil Jurkovec just went 13 of 20 for 310 yards and 2 touchdowns, rushed for 81 yards and 3 more touchdowns, and BC hung 41 up on Georgia Tech. BC's not an explosive, has not been a part of it's because they haven't had their quarterback all year, but now that he's back, they're still not a 41-point type of offense. Stanford has lost 5 in a row, and they've given up 33.8 during that stretch. You need to blow these teams out.
Yes.
You need to blow them out. That's step one. But then you look at it and you say, okay, let's just say Notre Dame just moves up 1 spot this week to number 8. That's it. It may seem like it. So then there's 5 teams you got to leap in front of, right? 7, 6, 5. No, there's 4 now that you got to leap in front of. So you're at 8. So you leap 7, you got to leap 6, you leap 5, and you got to leap 4.
Right.
So you need to leap 4 teams in 2 weeks. Seems daunting, but then I looked at it and I said, well, three of the teams ahead of them are all Big Ten East teams that haven't played, and they've only played one game against each other.
Exactly.
So Ohio State plays Michigan State this week and Michigan the week after. If Ohio State wins out, that's 2 teams that are gone. If Ohio State gets beat by one of those 2 teams, then Ohio State's out.
Probably 3 teams gone. Yeah.
I think if Michigan beats Ohio State and wins the Big Ten title, they're absolutely in the college football playoff. And I would argue the same thing about Michigan State. If one of those 2 teams wins out, they will be in the playoff.
I agree.
That's what I think.
But the committee clearly loves the Big Ten. They love a lot about what the Big Ten is. So
you have to
Big Ten champs is absolutely
and honestly should. In this season of college football playoff, if one of those 3 teams goes 12-1, they should be in. No matter, Notre Dame could win 80-0 the next 2 weeks, and that wouldn't change.
It would not matter
of them being ahead of Notre Dame, because they would have a lot more high quality wins than what Notre Dame has.
Yeah, completely agree.
So you look at that and you say, okay, so that's 2. There's guaranteed 2 Big Ten teams are going to fall behind Notre Dame.
Yes.
So now you go now you go from worst case scenario, you go to 6.
Right.
So now you just have to pass 2 teams. And it's pretty easy. And the thing about it is 3 things can happen to get those 2. And that what adds to this is actually something that they have a chance at doing. It'd be one thing if it was 2 things got to happen, and if you don't get the inside straight, you're not going to the playoff.
Right.
That's not the case. And again, barring upsets, so barring Georgia losing to Georgia Tech and then getting beat by Bama, which is not going to happen, barring Bama losing to Auburn, barring Penn State beating Michigan State, and then Michigan State beating Ohio State.
Right, they all just beat each other.
Right, Michigan loses to Maryland, barring all that stuff, or Wisconsin beats the Big Ten. That's the other interesting thing that I'm not even going to get into yet. Yeah. If Wisconsin beats the East champ, I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah.
But so anyway, 3 things. One of 3 things needs to happen. Number 1, Cincinnati needs to lose. This is going to upset some people because of the head-to-head. The reality is the committee has made very clear that the head-to-head doesn't matter as much. They're going to look at the whole resume, and it's clear they don't like Cincinnati very much.
Very clear.
And Cincinnati has outside of their win over Notre Dame, Cincinnati has not been an impressive football team this year. They really haven't. They've been a pretty good group of 5 team. Anyone that watched that game thinks that's that was Notre Dame played worth a darn that day just hasn't ever watched Notre Dame before. So a 12-1 Cincinnati with a loss to either SMU, East Carolina, or Houston has a chance of being leaped by Notre Dame should Notre Dame win out and win out impressively. I think we could debate the merits of it, but it's the reality. I'm not giving you my opinion based on what I think should happen. I'm giving you my opinion based on what I think the committee is showing us.
The committee is looking for any possible way to not have Cincinnati in the Final Four. And if they're talking about Notre Dame versus Cincinnati, and they put the resumes next to each other and do all the things that they're going to do, they're going to take Notre Dame. They're going to take Notre Dame.
Unless Cincinnati just goes out there and steamrolls their next few opponents, which they have an opportunity to do. They play, because here's the thing. This is the best part of their schedule coming up, like the best stretch of games. Obviously, none of these teams are as good as Notre Dame, but they play 8-2 SMU, 6-4 ECU, and 9-1 Houston, which would be in the AAC championship game.
Right.
If they convincingly beat those teams, then I think the resume changes, and they would, you know, they're clearly in if they win those games. If they win out even ugly, they're going to be in. But I'm saying, like, let's say they get upset by you know, SMU, by ECU by a field goal, and they pound SMU and pound Houston, maybe then you could say they have a case. If they pound those teams and they win out, they're in. They deserve to be in over everybody not named Georgia.
Right.
At this point in time.
I agree.
Right?
And the committee will hate it.
They got to play better.
But they, yeah, exactly.
They got to play better. So that's, but in the way that they're playing with SMU, ECU, and Houston coming up, it's not given that they're gonna win out. So I think that them losing to one of those three teams would look a whole lot worse than Notre Dame losing to Cincinnati. And as I said, the committee's going to look at your entire resume. Fans obsess too much on what happened that one weekend. The reason that I thought that the Michigan State thing was stupid is because Michigan and Michigan State have almost identical resumes, other than the fact that Michigan State beat Michigan.
Exactly.
Cincinnati and Notre Dame would not have similar resumes if they lose to one of the three teams left on their schedule. Cincinnati would have a worse loss, and their one big win would be negated by the fact that Notre Dame has like 4 or 5 better wins than they do, especially with Wisconsin continuing to win. So that's one. Number two is, and I'm not even going to talk about chaos in the Big Ten. Number two is Oregon has to lose. And if you look at Oregon's schedule coming up, Vince, that's doable. They got to play. They're most likely going to have to play Utah twice. The only way that doesn't happen. So Oregon plays Utah this weekend, and it's at Utah. Utah was playing pretty good football until they kind of sputtered their way through a 38-29 win over Arizona. That struck me as a we're looking ahead to next week kind of game.
Right.
Because they were coming off of a 52-7 win over Stanford and a 44-24 win over UCLA. Utah is playing good football right now. I think they're capable of beating Oregon, and they get them at home, and then they play Colorado at home. If they get upset by Colorado, then they're not going to go, assuming Arizona State wins out. But right now, Utah has a 1-game advantage over Arizona State in the South. If Oregon beats Utah, then they would have the same record. But the problem for them is Utah has the head-to-head for Arizona State. Utah has the head-to-head. So that's what makes that one a little bit trickier. So Utah right now is 6-1 in the conference because 2 of Utah's losses were to BYU and San Diego State. They only have 1 conference loss, even though they're 7-3. Arizona State has 2 conference losses. So Utah would have to lose twice for Arizona State to get in, and Arizona State has to win out. So most likely Oregon's going to have to play Utah twice. You and I both know it is hard to beat a good team twice.
Absolutely.
And then also Oregon has to play Oregon State at home. Now, again, that's a game they should win, but this is a good Oregon State team. They're not great, but they're good. They're 6-4. Jonathan Smith is a name that Notre Dame fans that are older than 25 should remember. Sadly, he was the quarterback for Oregon State when they beat Notre Dame in the Fiesta Bowl back with Ken Simonton and TJ Hushmanzada and Chad Johnson. He's done a really good job. He was the OC at Washington when they went to the playoff. I believe he was their OC that year. But he's been now, I think, 2nd or 3rd year at Oregon State. He's doing a really nice job. They're 6-4. They just came off of a beat down of Stanford. And, they've had a couple bad losses, but they also beat Utah. They beat Washington. They spanked USC at USC. So that it's doable that Oregon could lose. Now,
for sure.
Oregon can't, if Oregon wins ugly, they still belong in over Notre Dame. I don't care what Notre Dame does, because there is nothing on Notre Dame's resume that comes close to competing with a road win over Ohio State.
Absolutely agree.
And they would be a conference champ. So they need Oregon to lose. And then the other one is they need Bama to lose. And Bama's got 2 games they might lose coming up. And that is Auburn, which I don't know how Auburn's going to handle what happened to them on Saturday. Did you see that, Vince?
I did not.
They were beating Mississippi State 28-3 and lost. Mississippi State at one point in time scored 33 straight points.
Wow.
Auburn ended up losing 43-34. So they got outscored 40-6 in the last 2.5 quarters. So Auburn has now dropped 2 games. That's a little, but it is troubling. It is at Auburn.
Right.
Alabama plays Arkansas this weekend. I don't think Arkansas has the firepower to hang with them. Right. And then they play at Auburn, and then they play Georgia in the SEC title game. So you need Alabama to lose
somewhere,
because I do think an 11-1 Notre Dame team gets in over an 11-2 Alabama team. Because everyone say, well, they got the extra data point. I'm sorry, Mercer does not count as a data point.
Exactly. Absolutely correct.
Doesn't.
And I realize that the committee is setting Alabama up to potentially be the first 2-loss team to get into the playoff. I get it, but I don't see that occurring.
Not over a 1-loss Notre Dame team.
Yeah, right.
I don't, because you say, well, they played in the SEC title game. I get that. First of all, a 2-loss Auburn team with their losses to Auburn, I don't care how they beat Georgia, they're not getting in.
Right.
Not with a loss to multiple 3-loss teams. You can't lose 2 games to 3-loss teams. The only thing is if they lose to Georgia in a competitive game. But even then, because I think that would be like, I do think the committee cares about perception and money and big names. That's why I think they would much rather have Notre Dame in than Cincinnati, because it is still this to the committee and the NCAA.
Yeah, for sure.
Although the NCAA doesn't have anything to do with the college football playoff, but to the committee and ESPN, it's still this. But when I look at it, I say, I think that they would understand that the backlash for putting Notre Dame in would be far less than the backlash for putting a 2-loss Alabama team that doesn't even win their conference.
Right.
Or beats Georgia with 1 loss. With 2 losses. I don't see that. I don't see them doing that over a 1-loss Notre Dame team. The only way Bama gets in to me is if Bama's behind Notre Dame. Now, Bama could still get in, but they're not going to be over Notre Dame. Does that make sense? Like, Bama could be the 4 seed and Notre Dame could be the 3, but they're not getting in. If Cincinnati loses twice, hypothetically, and it's Oregon Georgia, Georgia beats Auburn by a point, right? Ohio State wins out. If Cincinnati and Oregon lose, it's Notre Dame and Bama. But if Oregon wins out and Ohio State wins out and Cincinnati loses and Alabama loses the game, I could see a scenario in which Notre Dame is at 4 and Bama's out. I could. Don't lose that, because the 1 loss they have looks worse now because A&M just lost their 3rd game. That's what the committee was trying to do to Alabama. They were trying to pump A&M up, put them all up to number 11 to try to make that loss look better. Right. And then A&M went and got smacked this weekend by Ole Miss. So now they have 3 losses now. And so I think it's going to be a lot harder now for Bama to get in with 2 losses. And Auburn losing to Mississippi State hurt them too, because now Auburn won't be ranked as high as they were last week. So the cards, like, everything's kind of aligning a little bit for Notre Dame right now.
But again, they're not in complete control of their own destiny.
Not at all.
Have to happen around
not at all.
But
the odds are much greater now.
The odds of things happening are better than they were this time last week, right? I mean, that's I think that's the point that you're trying to make. Like, there is a path, and it's a clear path if certain things happen. I mean, again, the Big Ten's going to eat itself up. Potentially, all 3 of those teams could eat each other up, and they all drop behind Notre Dame. But at the very least, 2 will, right? And so that puts you at 6. And when you're at 6, you have a shot. Plain and simple. And like you said, with the way Cincinnati has
even
played
if they're not
weeks,
6 this weekend, to your point,
yes,
they don't have to be 6 on Tuesday.
They don't have to be. They don't have to be. Right. They don't have to be. They have
That's
to be.
why the Oklahoma loss was, because if you'd added Oklahoma needs to lose into that data point, it's like, okay, now you need 3 out of 4. And just do the math, 75% compared to 67%. You know what I mean? Like the odds just keep getting better. And then you look at the way certain teams are playing. They just need 2 out of 3 things to happen. And I think those things are doable. But Notre Dame's got to handle their business first, obviously.
Yeah.
But as I sat and looked at everything last night, and it was like 5 o'clock in the morning, because like when I finally finished on my work, and I'm like, I wrote a note like playoff pathway, because I'm looking at it, I'm like, wow, this is actually something that could happen.
But you want to sleep on it and make sure that you're not like, seeing things at 5 o'clock in the morning.
Correct. Because like when the sun starts coming up, you're like, yeah, it's time to go to bed.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was an interesting thing. And I see people saying, well, they're not ready to be. Look, I don't know how much college football you've watched this year, but there's nobody that scares me like Bama last year or Clemson 2018 or
LSU 2019.
There's no team like that this year.
Right.
Ohio State maybe could get there, but again, their defense still sucks.
Their defense is not good. It's not good.
Yeah, but their offense is playing pretty good football right now.
And look, okay, people might take this the wrong way, but Georgia, their defense is unbelievable. Their defense is really, really good. But their offense, the way that Notre Dame's defense has played the last 2 weeks, hey, man,
as long as Kyle Hamilton plays,
oh, yes,
I'll take my chances against them. Yeah,
absolutely. But roll the ball out.
You need Kyle Hamilton in the playoff to have a chance to play with those teams.
No question about it. Yeah. You need to be at full strength. I mean,
and he'll be fresh.
See, it's true.
He'll be fresh.
This is very true.
You need to be full strength of the guys who have a chance to be full strength.
Yeah.
Not like, you don't need Maris Luafau. Maris hasn't played all year.
Right. And Avery Davis isn't walking through that door. Like all of those different things that are not happening. I'm talking about the people that are available. They need to be at full strength. Yes. No question.
Yep.